All right, welcome back to ABA exam review and our latest BCBA exam practice question set. We're going through this set together and breaking each question down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. As always, when you pass, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. A team of preschool teachers are trained on using inter-response time to measure behaviors in their classroom. They start using inter-response time to measure certain behaviors, but are confused on when they should start recording the first data point. How might you explain this to them? One of the challenges on more complex measurements like inter-response time when working with people who aren't maybe as trained as we are is explaining when exactly recording should start. Frequency is pretty easy because it's very discrete, but when you get into durations and more timing-based measurements, you got to be very specific about when recording starts and when recording stops. So in this case, we have some teachers who are wanting to use inter-response time to measure behavior. And they start using it, but they don't know when they should start recording the first data point. So as the analyst, how would you explain to them when you start recording inter-response time data? A, at the beginning of the first response, start recording. Well, let's think about what inter-response time is measuring. It's measuring the time in between two responses. So you're measuring from the end of one response to the start of the next. So the first response, we're not worried about the beginning of the first response. We're worried about the end. Once that first response ends, then we can measure how much time passes until the second response starts. So same with B. We're not starting recording at the start of the second response. We're going to finish our first data point then, but we're going to start recording at the end of the first response. And again, if you think about what we're measuring with inter-response time, it makes sense. You're measuring time in between responses from the end of one response to the start of another. So your first data point is going to be from the end of the first response to the start of the second. And then D, after the presentation of the SD, start recording. That would be more akin to something like latency, where you're measuring time in between the SD and the response. But if we're going to measure our first data point for inter-response time, we're going to start at the end of the first response. Your son has a strong aversion to certain textures of food. Anytime he comes into contact with the food, he recoils violently. His feeding therapist decides to have your son repeatedly touch the food until the recoil starts to decrease. What is occurring if the recoiling does decrease? Now, the question is asking about the recoiling and specifically saying it's going to decrease. Okay, so when we're tackling this question, we've got to consider the recoiling as decreasing. And how are we getting there? Well, we know the son has a strong aversion to textures, and when he contacts the food, he recoils violently. So the recoiling is likely some sort of reflex. So this might be respondent behavior, right? Because now every time he touches the food, he has this reflex of recoiling. So what the feeding therapist is going to do is have the son touch the food until the recoil starts to decrease. So what strategy do we use with a repeat, where we repeatedly introduce a stimulus to try and decrease the response or the reflex? A, negative reinforcement. Well, think about it. The recoiling is decreasing. So can it be reinforcement? It can't, because reinforcement would be increasing something. Nothing is increasing here. So same with B, positive reinforcement. You've got to be very careful about our consequences of punishment and reinforcement. You've got to think, what is the behavior doing? If it's decreasing, no matter what we think, it can't be reinforcement, because reinforcement only increases. So that leaves us with habilitation and habituation. Two very like sounding words, but they mean very different things. Habilitation is when we try to teach skills that increase access to reinforcers in the general environment while decreasing access to punishers in the general environment. Think about habilitation into a new environment, or habilitation into a new school, or habilitation to anywhere, right? Where we're trying to increase access to reinforcement. But we're not doing that here. What we're doing is habituation, because habituation is the repeated presentation of a stimulus in order to try and decrease a reflex especially. So by repeatedly introducing the food and touching the food, they're working to decrease the reflex of touching the food. So what is occurring if the recoiling does decrease is dehabituation. Amber saw a drink she wanted to try on Instagram. The ingredients included tequila, seltzer water, cranberry juice, and lime. She made the first one and it tasted too much like tequila. What should Amber conduct to get the right amount of tequila in the drink? Now, if you have an analysis question like this and they start talking about the right amount, if you're fluent, hopefully you immediately get the answer, okay? And as you get better, and that's why fluency is so important, because as you get more fluent, you're going to start predicting some of these answers. Remember, we should be doing all of our work in the question. We don't jump immediately to the answer choice. And so you're going to get to the point where you read something like the right amount of tequila and you immediately think, okay, I can guess what this might be. So she has all these ingredients, tequila, seltzer water, cranberry juice, and lime, and it's too much tequila. So she wants to get the right amount of tequila. What analysis is she going to do? A, comparative analysis. Well, with the comparative analysis, we're taking two separate interventions. Now remember, these are all applied, right? So you got to think in terms of this applied. You've got to take our technical understanding of it and apply it to real life. With the comparative analysis, we wouldn't be comparing things in the same drink, right? We'd be comparing two different drinks. We have one drink here. We consider it one intervention. A component analysis is when you take that one intervention and you look at the different parts. Well, we've already identified the part that we want to change. And so now we have to see what's the dosage of that part. What is the right amount? And to get the right amount, we need to conduct a parametric analysis. So we've got our technical understanding of what these analyses are, and then we apply it to this real life situation. And that's what you're going to be doing over and over again on the exam. Stu has his first cup of French roast coffee at 4:30 a.m. Stu usually drinks 3 cups of coffee per day, but he tries to space the cups out. Stu doesn't drink his second cup of coffee until 10:30 a.m. Given this information, what would 6 hours represent? So let's think about this, right? Specifically, they want us to look at 6 hours, okay? Now, we have to be careful here, right? Because we know that Stu drinks 3 cups of coffee per day. And if you look at that, what kind of measurement would you say that is? Well, that would be rate, because we have a frequency, 3 cups, over time per day. And if you look at A, rate is our first answer. So if you read this too quickly and you're trying to go too quick, which you shouldn't do, and you read it once and you jump to the answer choices, there's a chance you might just say, oh, 3 cups of coffee per day, that's rate. But the question is not asking about that. It's asking about this 6 hours. So we can eliminate rate. So what does 6 hours represent? Well, he has his first cup of coffee at 4:30 a.m. and then a second cup at 10:30 a.m. So 6 hours have passed in between responses. So are we looking at latency? No, because latency is time in between the SD and the first response. What we are looking at is, and what the 6 hours represents, is inter-response time. Time in between drinking his cups of coffee. The first response ends at 4:30. The next one starts at 10:30. 6 hours have passed. We're looking at inter-response time. And then D, duration. Duration, remember, is just the total amount of time for a single response, which is not what we're looking at. So again, you've got to be very careful about going too quickly. 3 cups of coffee per day is rate, but the question is not asking about that. It's asking about this 6 hours. And the 6 hours represents C, inter-response time. Rowan, when she was just a young child, was told to never stick her fingers or toes into electrical outlets. Rowan, to this day, has never stuck her fingers or toes into electrical outlets. This behavior would be considered what? Okay, if we think about the behavior of Rowan sticking her fingers or toes into electrical outlets, she's never done it. Meaning, has Rowan ever been punished for doing it? No. Has she ever been reinforced for doing it? No. She's never actually come into contact with the consequence for sticking fingers or toes into electrical outlets. But verbally, when she was young, she was told, don't do it. Okay, because if you do it, then this will happen, this will happen, this will happen. So even though Rowan has never actually come into contact with the consequence of sticking fingers or toes into electrical outlets, she still doesn't do it. So this behavior will be considered what? A, contingency shaped. Well, it's not going to be contingency shaped for all the reasons we just said. Contingency shaped involves coming into contact with a consequence. If you do this, then you do this. If Rowan had stuck her finger in the electrical outlet and then she got shocked, well, and she stopped doing it, well, then her behavior is contingency shaped because she's come into contact with that consequence. But she's never come into contact with it, and the verbal rule was enough to prevent her from engaging in that behavior. See, consequence maintained. We don't refer to it necessarily as consequence maintained, typically contingency shaped or rule governed. Regardless, it's not consequence maintained because she's never ever come into contact with the consequence. So Rowan's behavior is considered rule governed. We have this verbal rule stipulating what she should not do, and she doesn't do it. She engages in the behavior. If she doesn't engage in the behavior, even though she's never experienced the consequence. So the behavior, again, is considered B, rule governed. Gilligan and his crew went to bring their boat to the restaurant on the other side of the bridge that sits on top of the lake. However, Gilligan can't fit his boat under the bridge if the canopy is up because the canopy will hit the bridge and break. While the canopy is up, the bridge functions as what? What is the question asking about? The question is asking about the bridge and relative to the canopy being up. So let's think about this. Gilligan and his crew want to bring their boat to the restaurant on the other side of the bridge. But Gilligan cannot fit his boat under the bridge if the canopy is up. And we know the canopy is up based on what the question says. Why? Because the canopy will hit the bridge and break, which would be punishing. Gilligan doesn't want his canopy to break, and if he hits the bridge and his canopy breaks, then he will be punished. He's no longer going to go under that bridge. So what is the bridge now signaling to Gilligan? A, S to D for punishment. Yes, the bridge is saying that there's a consequence available for trying to fit your boat under the bridge with your canopy up, and that consequence will be punishing. You don't want to hit the bridge and break. It is not an SD for reinforcement. An SD for reinforcement would be maybe while the canopy is down, Gilligan could fit under the bridge. It is not an S delta for punishment. An S delta signals something is not available. Well, it can't signal it is and isn't available at the same time. And since the bridge is now signaling to Gilligan, and Gilligan is going to avoid the punishment of breaking his canopy, the bridge is signaling to Gilligan punishment is available. Remember, SDs signal consequences. A lot of times we get trapped thinking, well, SDs only signal reinforcement. SDs signal consequences. Usually, Tommy is diligent and completes most of his assigned tasks in 24 hours. However, during the summer, Tommy is more laid back and might take a few days to complete some tasks. Summer functions as a blank relative to completing work in 24 hours. So we're looking at summer functioning relative to completing work in 24 hours. Notice how we always start with what the question is asking and what they're specifically keyed in on, because they're always giving you a lot of information. You've got to focus on what they want you to look at. We're looking at summer relative to completing work in 24 hours. Essentially, how has summer changed his behavior? Well, prior, he would always complete tasks in 24 hours. Summer comes around. Now Tommy takes a few days. His behavior has now changed in the presence of summer. Something has happened with Tommy. For what reason? Well, ask yourself, is reinforcement still available for Tommy completing his assignments? Yeah, because he's still completing the task. He's just not doing it as quickly. So, one, the value of completing these tasks quickly has decreased because he's in summer. And two, his behavior has temporarily changed. And so what can decrease the value of something and temporarily change behavior? Well, A, a motivating operation, right? Motivating operations have behavior altering effects and value altering effects. They can decrease the value and then temporarily alter the behavior. Summer is not an SD because it's not necessarily signaling to Tommy that reinforcement is available, because Tommy is still completing the task in the same way and nothing has changed there. The value has changed and his behavior has temporarily changed. It's not a prompt because it doesn't follow the SD and nothing is being prompted out, and summer is not functioning as a prompt. And then D is not a consequence because it's not following Tommy's behavior is preceding it. So summer is functioning as a motivating operation relative to completing work in 24 hours. You are a behavior analyst working in an ABA program out of your local university on a contract. One of the directors of the program asked you to help with a research project that they plan to publish. Upon publication, you notice that you do not receive any credit for the publication. Is this acceptable? I know all the clinical and working BCBAs don't like the research portions of the task list, but we've got to know them. Okay, we've got to be familiar with them. And this one's pretty straightforward, right? So you're working on a contract in an ABA program as a behavior analyst, and then one of the directors asks you to help with a research project that they want to publish. They publish it, but they don't give you any credit. Is that okay? No, obviously not, right? Everybody, no matter what, should be credited for the work they did. So A, yes, if you did not do an adequate amount of work. It doesn't matter little or small. If you helped, you need to receive credit in some form. B, yes, since you were contracted out by the clinic, that doesn't matter. Even though you're contracted, you're still a BCBA and you're still adhering to the ethical code. You need credit. C, no, you must receive credit for the work you provided. Yeah. If you write a treatment plan, or if you assist in a treatment plan, if you assist in a report, if you assist in whatever, if you assist in something, if you help in some way, you must receive credit for what you did. Fantastic. Thank you for watching. Check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials. Remember, this is brought to you by ABA Exam Review. When you pass, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.